All right. Madness. For people who have followed this channel for longer than a few months, you know that I do madness boards during the off season, right? And since it's technically the off season, I want to do a bit of a madness board. So I wanted to look at teams that finished in the bottom 10 this year, and then I wanted to contrast it with the last 6 years overall. I don't go further back than this because 2012 2013 was only a 48 game season. Always looked at that season and kind of had an asterisk next to it for the fact that it was a shorter season. There were some unpredictable things that happened, and in an 82 game season, maybe would have turned out completely different. That plus it throws the whole point totals off. So I would have to project out what teams would have got over 82 games, and it's not something that works. Now, this is the kind of scribblings you might see in a movie or a TV show where a character's lost their mind and they can't remember where they were, what they were doing, or maybe even their name. And so they're scribbling on the walls, they're scribbling on their arm, they're scribbling all over the place, and it's madness. That's why I call it madness. Um, so I wanted to look at the teams that finished in the bottom 10 this year. So here's your futility for this year, and I went with only the bottom 10. Not every team that missed the playoffs, because teams that barely missed the playoffs are more likely to make it back in than teams that didn't come close. So I wanted to look and say, this just started out as, I wonder how likely it is that a team that finished in the bottom 10 this year makes it to the playoffs next year, based on, say, last year. And then it went beyond and beyond, and it turned into this. So this year's bottom 10 was the Philadelphia Flyers, Vancouver Canucks, Anaheim Ducks, Edmonton Oilers, New York Rangers, Buffalo Sabres, Detroit Red Wings, New Jersey Devils, LA Kings, and Ottawa Senators. And I'm wearing Detroit because they've been on the last three. So if we look to the previous season, the top 10, no, bottom 10 were New York Islanders, Edmonton Oilers, New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, Vancouver Canucks, Detroit Red Wings, Montreal Canadiens, Anaheim Ducks, Arizona Coyotes. The Ducks are only on here once. The Ottawa Senators, and the Buffalo Sabres. So what stands out right away is that from last year to this year being the 2018-2019 season that just finished, only one team that was in the bottom 10 made the playoffs. Chicago made a push. The Rangers admitted they're in a retool, but things stayed pretty similar, really. The Montreal Canadiens were close. I'm going to give them credit. Healthy Carey Price definitely helped. And adding Domi and getting rid of Galchenyuk seemed to help them as well. But in general, we look at playoff results, and only one team made the playoffs that was in the bottom 10 last year, 2017-2018. The previous season, a little bit better result for teams that were in the bottom 10 making the playoffs the next year. You got Carolina, LA, Florida, Dallas, Detroit, Buffalo, Arizona, New Jersey, Vancouver, and Colorado. And you're going to notice I'm saying some of the same teams over and over again, and we will get into that. But LA, New Jersey, and Colorado all jumped back into the playoffs after being in the bottom 10. LA had 86 points that year, so if you're going to look as an LA fan and go, well, we should be able to get back next year, 71 points makes it dicey. Although, there have been instances where teams that finished last in the league have rocketed up the next season. So maybe for Ottawa, there's still hope. Because a team with a lower point total made it to the playoffs after 2016-2017, that being the Colorado Avalanche, who had 48 and got to the playoffs the next year. And, outside of Colorado faithful, we had all kind of given up on him, and Joe Sakic should be fired, and now it's two years later, and he's a genius. That's what it takes. That's what happens. That's the difference right there. That's the difference. 2015-2016, Colorado's at the top of the list. Montreal, Buffalo, Arizona, Winnipeg, Calgary, Columbus, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Toronto. Toronto, of course, with that 69 points, they would draw first in the draft lottery, and they would draft Austin Matthews. That's the reason they're no longer on the board after that. 2014-2015, Colorado's at the top of the board. Columbus, San Jose, Philly, New Jersey, Carolina, Toronto, Edmonton, Arizona, and Buffalo. Now, in the following year, Montreal, Calgary, Columbus, Edmonton, and Toronto, as I said, who won that draft lottery, they all ended up going to the playoffs. But in 2014, 2015, it was only 2. It was San Jose and Philly that got back into the playoffs the year after. Philly's got a very good chance of jumping back into the playoffs this coming season, I would think, because they're at the top. And yet, at the top, only 1 out of 5 that finished at the top of this list ended up going into the playoffs the next year, whereas 2 of those in the bottom of the list, the least likely, ended up jumping into the playoffs the following season. So the season where you see the most turnover is 2015-2016 into 2016-2017, where 5 teams that were in the bottom 10 ended up making the playoffs the next year, which makes a good case for at least 2, I would think. The season that saw the lowest amount was 2017-2018. This bottom 10 basically almost mirrors the teams that missed the playoffs this year. Notice I said missed the playoffs because some of them moved up out of the bottom 10, but not into a playoff spot. Montreal and Chicago, as the best examples of that. And the Islanders are the only ones that got into the playoffs, and they were kind of favored to be out this year. There was a lot of talk about how the Islanders losing Tavares was going to take them further down the list rather than right into the playoffs. Now, 2013-2014, as far back as I go, the New Jersey Devils are at the top of the list. Toronto, and this was when Toronto with Phil Kessel, and they were trying to get their way into the playoffs and patch things together, and it just wasn't quite working. Winnipeg, Carolina, Vancouver, the Islanders, Calgary, Edmonton, Florida, and Buffalo. So, of this list, in 2015, Winnipeg, Vancouver, and Calgary made the playoffs. I remember this year for the simple fact that hockey in Canada sucks. This was 2014 was kind of the year that hockey in Canada. Look, you got Montreal, Montreal's not on the list, but you got Toronto, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton in the bottom 10. So it's a dark time for Canadian hockey that year. I'll figure out the whole talking thing soon. Anyways, but 3 of those Canadian teams would jump into the playoffs the following season. Now, contrast that with where we're at now. We've got Edmonton and Vancouver in the bottom 10, Ottawa in the bottom 10, Edmonton and Vancouver back here, which shows you that some teams have seen a lot of misery. So who's seen the most? Every year, Buffalo's been in the bottom 10. All 6. This year, it looked like they dragged their way out, and then they fell right back into it. Vancouver, 5 times. They made the playoffs once. Edmonton, 5 times. They made the playoffs once. Arizona, 4 times they're in the bottom 10. New Jersey, 4 times. Carolina, Detroit, Colorado, and Toronto are all in the bottom 10 3 times in the last 6 years. There are 8 teams that do not show up on the list. Boston, Minnesota, Nashville, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Tampa, Vegas, and Washington. And here's the interesting thing. So we talk a lot about rebuilds, right? Oh, you gotta rebuild, you gotta do it properly. Oh, you gotta do it properly. The 8 teams that aren't on the list, Boston was in the Stanley Cup final. Nashville was in the final in 2017. Pittsburgh's got 3 Stanley Cups. I know they got Crosby and Malkin. I'm just saying the last 6 years there haven't been any kind of a rebuild. St. Louis, they're not on the list. They won the Cup this year. Tampa, not on the list. President's Trophy winner this year. That's almost as good as a Cup. Vegas, despite them being an expansion team, having 2 years, they have not been in the bottom 10. And Washington, of course, won the Stanley Cup in 2018. So the trick is finding your way to go from being on this list to being on this list. And while we can argue that Minnesota has been mediocre in middle of the pack, they have also not been bad. They haven't been a bad team. Now, whether that eventually means that they will be, that remains to be seen. But they have not been a bad team over the last 6 years. So, futility score. Here's how I scored it. If you're at the top of the list, you get 1 point. Because, look, you got Colorado with 90 points, New Jersey with 88, Carolina with 87, Philly's got 82, Colorado 82, and the Islanders with 80 are the lowest point total for any team that finishes at the top of a given list. At the bottom of the list, well, you get 10 points. because you are the worst of the worst. The best number on the board is Toronto's 69 points. The worst is Colorado's 48 points the year after. So overall, the numbers would show that the difference between 87 and 48 is tremendous, and thus the points should be awarded thusly. So with that taken into consideration, remember, first 1 point, bottom 10 points, and then 9, 8, 7, and so on. I went 3 years by 3 years. So the first 3 years, 2013 through to 2016, Anaheim doesn't show up on the board at all. In the 3 most recent years, in green, they get 3 points for their appearance this year, third on the list. So they have 3 points overall. Not a big deal. Arizona, they had 13 points in the 3 oldest seasons on the board, 15 points in the most recent, 28 overall, which is high. Buffalo, your winners, the Buffalo Sabres, they had 23 points the first 3 years, 22 points the most recent 3 seasons, for a total of 45. Calgary, they had 13 points for the first 3 seasons. They have not shown up on the board in the 3 most recent seasons. Highly unlikely they're bottom 10 in the NHL next season either. Carolina, they had 10 points that first half. They've had 1 point the last 3 seasons. And with the way things are being run, we'll see if they end up back on the list or if they end up being a cup contender. They could be anywhere in between. Chicago does not show up on the list the first 3 seasons. They get 4 points for their 1 appearance in the most recent seasons. So 4 points overall. Colorado, 2 points for the first 3 seasons. 10 points for that bottom spot right here. And then, of course, they haven't been in the bottom 10 for the last 2 seasons that they've made the playoffs. Total of 12 points. Columbus shows up for 9 points worth in the first 3 seasons. They have not shown up in the 3 most recent, where they've made the playoffs every year, for a total of 9 points. Dallas is not there for the first 3 seasons. The 3 most recent, they show up once for 4 points. Total of 4. Detroit, they do not show up those first 3 seasons. They're making the playoffs every year. And then in the 3 most recent seasons, they've got 18 points. So Detroit is trending in the wrong direction. Understandably, they were at the top, near the top for so long. Edmonton, they had 25 points the first 3 seasons. Surprisingly, they only have 6 points the last 3 seasons for a total of 31, which is the second highest number on the board. But the 3 most recent seasons, only 6 points, means it's not as bad as it might look on the surface. Of course, if at some point McDavid says, that's it, I'm out of here, I'm tired of losing, then it's just as bad as it looks. Florida, 9 points the first 3 years, only 3 points the 3 most recent for 12 overall. LA does not show up on the board the first 3 seasons. They get 11 points for their appearances the last 2. Right here and right here. So in the last 3 years, they've accumulated 11 points. Montreal, 2 points in the first 3 seasons on the board. 7 points in the 3 most recent for 9 overall. New Jersey, 6 points in the first 3 seasons. And 16 in the 3 most recent for a total of 22. It's high. That number is high compared to most of the rest of the league. The New York Islanders, 6 points in the first 3 seasons. Only 1 in the 3 most recent for a total of 7 points. The New York Rangers did not show up on the board the first 3 seasons, have had 8 points in the last 3 for a total of 8. The Ottawa Senators do not show up the first 3 years, have 19 points in only 2 appearances on the board. That's high. That's about as high as you're going to get. Even Buffalo, who got 20 points those first 2 years, have to be impressed with the 2 most recent years by Ottawa after 2017, where they were so close to maybe being in a final and then no. So 19 points overall for Ottawa. Philly, 4 points the first 3 years, 1 point the last 3. And that, of course, was this year's miss from the playoffs. The San Jose Sharks had 3 points for their miss in 2014-2015. They had 89 points. It's the only time they've missed the playoffs in recent seasons. It was still a decent year. They have 3 points overall. Toronto had 19 points. Those first 3 years, they've had none because they made the playoffs 3 years in a row. So 19 overall. Vancouver, it's sad in Vancouver. 13 points for the first 3 seasons, 16 points for the 3 most recent. But they are trending, it would seem, in the right direction. So this motion would tell you they should be out of that bottom 10 next year. It is not as bad for Vancouver as it may appear to some others. Winnipeg, 8 points the first 3 seasons and none in the 3 most recent. So there you go. Madness. So while there's other things going on in the hockey world, I figured I'd take a look at this. So here's the question. Let's just say that the average is 3. Because you got 3, 2, 5, 3, 1. Let's just say 3 of these bottom 10 teams are going to make the playoffs next year. Which 3 are you picking? And I'll just say, based on right now what the rosters have, I would go with Philly. I would go with Anaheim. And it's hard to go against. It's hard to go against New Jersey, to be honest. It is. And I know they need help in goal, but it's hard to go against New Jersey. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And yes, 45 is the highest score by a mile by the Buffalo Sabres. That's why they really need to make the playoffs. They need to turn this around. And the Oilers have 31. Vancouver has 29. Arizona has 28. New Jersey 22. These are the teams that need to turn it around. So, and another side question for you. Does this mean rebuilding or mismanagement? And I'll give you a hint. Yes is probably the answer. Because one usually leads to the other. All right. Let me know what you guys think as always. And I'll talk to you again soon.